First, a little bit about me. Um, I am a recent author. I wrote a book called Creative Velocity Propelling Breakthrough Ideas in the Age of Generative AI. And this material is certainly derived from that book. Before that, I was a global product executive for over 20 years at companies like Apple, Amazon, Discovery Networks, T-Mobile, where I launched the first Android phone. And more recently, I am the co-creator of the Product Management Leadership Accelerator, which is an executive education program at the University of Washington Foster School of Business. And I am here today to really help you feel more confident on your path to achieve your goals. And one of the ways to do that is to do risk planning for the future. And generative AI makes a great partner for this. So, we're going to talk about both the methodology, but also how to apply it with generative AI as your thought partner in this process. In my work with innovation teams and business leaders, I teach structured frameworks to help people think more creatively, more flexibly, and more expansively as they are navigating their strategies under intense pressure. And that's why I'm here today. The risks that you're navigating these days are more ambiguous, emergent, and adversarial than ever. Competitors are popping up in all sorts of places that you hadn't imagined. And there are new ways to create obstacles to your success than you had the last time you might have tried to achieve a goal that was similar to the one you're facing now. And so, this path, this method that we're going to talk about, is really perfect for building out a sense of confidence in your plan by looking at what could go wrong. And this expands your field of vision by preparing for those eventualities and giving you even more opportunity to succeed. So the Stoics had a method called the premeditation of evils, and it was based on the idea that what we don't look at is where the biggest risk appears. And when we don't expect it, the weight of it appearing is that much more disastrous. So a lot of times we convince ourselves our plan will be successful, and we spend all of our time planning for success. But what if you actively imagined your plan, your system, your process could actually fail? And I know it can be overwhelming to think about success and failure simultaneously, to actually imagine the things that are going to create disruption in your path to success. When you're deeply invested in your customer's success, it's really difficult to think about hurting them or creating obstacles to their success because all you're doing is putting your energy towards making them delighted and happy to be your customer. And so the psychological burden of anticipating failure while maintaining momentum makes you feel a little bit like you don't believe in your own plan. And so it's hard to show an active effort to see how your plan might fail, especially if in a company you have people who are non believers in your plan or your product or your idea. So giving them any space or oxygen really feels like you're giving up on the success of your plan. And it's actually quite the opposite. When you think about ways that you can fail, you actually are building emotional equanimity to the prospect of failure, which therefore makes you much clearer headed when you are actually facing a challenge because you anticipated you might have one. And it gives you a lot of creative confidence to imagine these scenarios and then come up with the perspective on how you would address them. You want to be able to say, I've imagined this negative possibility, but I'm prepared for it. I understand a plan B, or I understand what will actually discount the impact of this negative force on my plan. You want to break the biases. A lot of times, consensus and expert and authority bias really reinforce our belief that our plan is foolproof, when in fact, what it's doing is narrowing our focus on the things we know and the people that we believe know better. And instead of imagining what could go wrong, you only imagine that everyone around you believes this will go right. And the thing that this approach really proves out is if you plan, if you fail to plan, you are more likely to fail. The idea that planning to fail actually creates success is counterintuitive, but it survived the Stoic philosophy for many years because thinking about what could go wrong and what the worst that could happen would be helps you identify unconventional solutions by working at your plan from a different perspective. So the value of a premeditation of evils exercise is its direct ability to dismantle consensus thinking. A pre-mortem for product launches works by identifying all of the things in your launch that could fail spectacularly. They don't have to happen frequently. They may only happen once, but if it happens and it causes you to fail spectacularly, then really what you've done is prepared for that instance to not occur because you've imagined what has to happen should you confront that problem. You want to work backward from that. You want to have the imagination to identify what could have gone wrong that could have created that negative outcome. And you want to use these methods because they provide scaffolding. They give you a structure to keep you from rambling off in a negative rumination or in only disaster planning. They give you an approach that helps you manage your thought process in a healthy way. And in doing that and working backwards from the negative outcomes, you actually can identify early warning systems that mitigate the impact of these obstacles or vulnerabilities in your plan. You're actually creating signals in the data that tells you, I'm not just looking for how I'm succeeding, I'm looking for signs I might be failing. And where would those signs be? You also really need to grow cognitive flexibility to imagine the unimaginable. You really have to get out of the idea of psychological safety with the plan. What happens if the plan self destructs? If something you hadn't imagined makes your plan less effective? In that case, where are you in helping deliver the business outcome, the customer outcome, or the personal outcome that you want? Because you're so stuck in the only way this could have worked. So you want to develop these contingency plans. You want to mitigate the biases that keep you from imagining the worst case scenario, that black swan event that could actually change the course of how your plan materializes. And unless you have a way to zig and zag through those, you are likely to fail at the first obstacle you encounter. So think of this as robust preparation and making peace with the inevitability of imperfection. So what makes generative AI a great collaborator for pre-mortem risk planning is it's not attached to any ideas. When you're in a company, people become such champions of ideas, they become attached to them. And it becomes hard for them to make adjustments or even to accept that there's a path to fail. So generative AI has so much psychological distance that it's not attached. If you tell one of your tool friends that your idea that you're working on could fail this way, it might give you 10 more ways it could fail because it's not attached to only the way you think about failing. So it offers psychological distance from your thinking about failure by giving you many other ways to consider you running into an obstacle that could cause your plan to fail. And one of the ways it does this is from its speed and pattern recognition. This is where humans really don't size up in terms of speed and accuracy in cross-cutting patterns. Cross-cutting patterns are very hard for humans to identify quickly. It's not that we can't, it's that we have to do a process cognitively that's much slower than what generative AI would perform. Generative AI can quickly evaluate first and second level threats and look across industries to see similar patterns and learnings that could be brought into your contingency plans. And the speed and breadth and depth is something that really helps you bring more to the table for you to consider and also for you to challenge yourself to break your own confidence in the plan that you have. Not that you are wrong, but to give yourself real world scenarios where your plan could go awry and then solving for those is actually the kind of confidence that you need to build a robust and resilient plan. So, a lot of times when you talk about premeditation of evils, you hear people worry about the pessimism it introduces into a corporate conversation or an organizational meeting where there's momentum and people are looking for opportunities to torpedo your plans. It's not that at all. It's action, not despair. It's provocation to force a response, and it's strategic imagination. If it becomes emotional fatalism, it is no longer a premeditation of evils exercise. It requires a solution orientation, not fear mongering. And so imagining hardships, imagining where processes might break, where assumptions might be wrong, and then thinking about what would happen if those do in fact come to fruition really actually is a plan for success. So if impact is severe, you want to focus on it, even if it might only be a blue swan scenario, a black swan scenario. If you actually see the possibility and the prospect as something you might encounter, you immediately discount the impact that it has. A premeditation of evils exercise improves precision because it starts with the broadest field of vision and then narrows thinking based on the filters that you use to curate the most serious issues you could face. So when you think about the idea that you are wasting time on the fringe, it's sometimes on the fringe where that one error could occur that could be catastrophic. And I think about those 0-day disasters, the most recent one where there was a hardware failure that created a catastrophic situation for SharePoint users. That one piece of hardware failing had that level of impact. Maybe it was rare that that might happen, but the idea there wasn't an immediate contingency plan for it creates that level of catastrophe that pre-planning and pre-mortem thinking could avoid. A lot of times people think it's just so broad that it might not be helpful. But the thing about breadth is that we get narrower and narrower as we get closer to launch. And we need to be reminded that that breadth of thinking can actually expose things at different stages of the delivery process. So keeping it broad at the beginning to imagine all the ways your plan could fail really helps you as you reach that part of the plan be prepared to succeed. Okay, there we go. So how do you look for risks you don't expect? This is where Gen AI is going to be a great partner because it's going to be looking in places you didn't know even to look at. It's going to look sideways. It's going to look inside out. It's going to look back to front. It's going to challenge your obvious assumptions, and it's going to ask you to reverse your assumptions when you use these plans. Linear thinking is protecting us on our path to what we know. What we really want to do is contradictory thinking, to imagine what we haven't considered. The power of contradictory thinking is in the fact that it reveals hidden assumptions. These hidden assumptions are the ones that often are where failure cases reside. If we believe that fast is better than slow and we never look at why slow could be better, we actually may miss an opportunity to create a revolutionary or innovative experience for customers that balances the need for fast and slow service. We often have blind spots. Those come from our cognitive biases. I've had years of experience doing X, and so I know the most likely scenarios I'll have to prepare for look like this. And unfortunately, those things do not actually protect us from the areas of our limited expertise. If there is something that we haven't been exposed to, it's likely going to sit in a blind spot, especially when we're looking at experience and expertise to guide us. Contradictory thinking is really great at driving innovation because, in one sense, contradictory thinking actually shows us the opposing forces that create opportunity. And so if success depends on this failure case going away, what do we do to make the failure case go away could be the opportunity for innovation. Again, we talk about building cognitive flexibility. Working backwards, by definition, requires us to look at the problem from a different perspective. And looking at different angles of the problem could, in fact, uncover opportunities for us to see new areas of risk. And so that enhances our foresight. And enhancing risk foresight by imagining how systems can be less than what we wanted them to be, no matter how much we planned for them to be the maximum we thought that we could deliver, that gap is really where we have to see risk. Our intentions may be good, but not good enough. Our delivery may execute on our mission, but our mission may be off what is currently prevailing in the market. So whatever is the risk, even in our thinking of how to deliver a product or in our assumptions about the market it lands in, this type of thinking helps us enhance risk foresight. It increases the odds of success tremendously because when you run into one of these scenarios, you have a chance of a plan B working. And one of the great things to think about when you think about that sort of plan B mindset is it's not one plan B, it's lots of plan Bs. It's what are the things in my toolkit I can throw at the problem if the problem emerges differently than what I had contemplated when I developed the solution. And that happens. Sometimes you think you understand the problem, but you're really understanding a symptom and your solution only delivers on the symptom. So this idea that you look more deeply at the problem space, more broadly, more expansively with generative AI, gives you the opportunity to see that success differently, to see what could be, in fact, a hurdle to success, because you're now looking at the perspective of risk that's more broad than just delivery risk. And again, as we've talked about, it busts expert biases. So contradictions, opposites, or reversals can spark creative insights. And when we encounter contradictions, our brains can't simply apply existing mental frameworks. They have to work harder to reconcile conflicting information. And it's this cognitive tension that really leads to the breakthrough moments in our plans. This is where we discover new connections. We see our familiar problems in a different light. And we actually live in the discomfort to go beyond our default assumptions intentionally. So being comfortable with this discomfort is part of risk planning. I have to believe something I hadn't thought of might happen. And when I uncover what that is in the planning stage, it's much less problematic for me than if it is out in the wild after my product launches or after my plan is put in motion in front of customers. So this juxtaposition to see things from a different perspective helps us see opportunities that we wouldn't have seen if we just approached the problem linearly. A really great example might be we offer express service to our best customers. However, that expedites their engagement with us and we don't spend as much time with them. And that's a tension that speed actually reduces the connectivity we have with our customers. And so that tension now gives us an opportunity to look at innovation that could balance that in a way that keeps us close to our customers, even though they're speeding through the express lane, because speed is a convenience. And so when we think of these things, there are three types of contradictory thinking frameworks that can really help us solve these issues. And I'm going to talk through each of them, then I'm going to give you some examples. And so while I'm talking through this, I would encourage you all to pull out your AI partner right now. And at some point, we're going to come into a place where I'm going to give you a prompt, and I want you to put it in to whichever AI tool you like. It doesn't matter if it's Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it is. I want you to take what's going to be coming up and then take a moment and practice it with your AI tool. But first, let me explain what these are, and then we'll go into the details where you can practice this with generative AI. So, paradoxical thinking, as we've talked about, balances tensions. It's when we say both things can be true. Something could be fast and engaging. And how would both of those things be true if engaging usually takes time? Right? Engagement is a time consuming process, and we're trying to treat people to convenient and quick service. Opposite thinking is when we challenge the fundamental assumptions that we have and think of them as the exact opposite of what we have imagined them to be. So, a really great way to think about this, if any of you are Seinfeld fans, there were many episodes around opposite thinking, and one particular one where George spent the entire time in the episode doing everything opposite of what he would do to see what would happen if that was the case. And he later claimed, the actor who played George later claimed that people came up to him after the show and said they tried it in their own life and found the same benefit that George found by doing the exact opposite of what he did. The idea is that you're looking at the world through a different lens, and in challenging your assumptions, you're recognizing that some of your assumptions you've been carrying for no good reason, or because they're easy, or because there's someone else's assumption who you've trusted and run with. So, the idea that opposite thinking is intentionally challenging your assumptions allows you to explore alternative, unconventional approaches. It trains your brain to think in opposites and therefore gives you that cognitive flexibility should one of your assumptions go awry as you're on your path to launch your plan. Inversion thinking asks you to consider the situation from a completely different outcome. A really great story that helps bring this kind of methodology to life is a story that Charlie Munger tells. And Charlie Munger was the COO of Berkshire Hathaway with Warren Buffett. And in World War II, Charlie Munger was a meteorologist. And as many people found themselves in jobs in World War II they had no experience in, he was very concerned that he would do a bad job and cause a catastrophe for all of the pilots who he was supporting. And so he decided that he would go ask all the pilots, what are the conditions that would be uh, uh, fatal for you? What would be the circumstances where you could not navigate your way successfully home or to complete your mission? What in the weather circumstances that you've encountered are the ones you need to avoid? And by thinking of all of the things that actually would kill the pilots, those were the only things he focused on. He didn't care about middle situations or things that might make their job difficult. What he cared most about was bringing them all home safely and making sure that they all survived the war. And in his changing his goal to a larger level thinking and more strategic outcome, he actually manufactured a path where he could focus on just the activities that he had to be extra good at in order to assure the pilot's success. So when you're prompting with AI, there's three really important practices to think about. You feel like you know your area so well, and you've been taught prompt engineering. So you're working really hard on putting all the specific details into your prompts these days. But this is exactly the opposite advice for what you need to do with this type of exercise. You need to give it the opportunity to be as broad as possible and then refine with specifics. That's how premeditation of evils works, because it allows you to see the largest landscape and then curate those areas based on the specifics that come back. And one of the ways to think about doing this is the term hypernym. And hypernym is when you talk about an area broadly versus a hyponym where you're talking about it very specifically. And a really good example of this would be if I were to say, what are ways that I could attach something to secure it to ensure that this piece doesn't fall apart and ruin my product? I could actually say, if I was using a hyponym, how might I glue this product? Uh, what type of nail should I use to secure this product? And in that difference, I'm going to focus my AA partner just on the scenario where the specifics are called out. If I can start with a word like attach, if I can start with a broader word, right, I can see a broader field, and then I can look at even the rare and events that might live on the fringe of that. And then I can determine which of those are most impactful, or would have the longest lasting impact on my capacity to succeed, and then focus myself on a plan to mitigate them. What AI will do is create that buffet for you, but what you must do is curate the meal. You must show human discernment. You must go in and say, these are the cases I hadn't thought about. These are the ones I want to explore. These are the ones we have plans for. But if you only get it to focus on the ones that you think you don't have plans for, you're actually telling it to focus only on a set of risk scenarios that you're aware of. And what you want to do is use as diverse a framing lens as possible to make sure you're enriching the risk landscape. The risks you haven't considered, remember from the beginning, the risks you haven't considered are often the most crushing when they appear. And so the tendency to narrow focus and the tendency to bring specifics in early actually undermines this process. You can move to that in a layered approach, which is exactly how the premeditation of evils expects you will work, which is to choose what to refine and explore in more detail. But until you actually lay the buffet, all you're doing is snacking in an unstrategic way. You really want to see all the possible places where things could go wrong, ethically, politically, financially, all the ways that they could go wrong mathematically, things you hadn't considered in terms of cost structure. All of those things are part of the lay of the land of how your plan might go wrong. And so when you start with AI, let it run fast and wide, and then bring it into a focal area that you curate based on your particular priorities. So you might start by saying, give me 50 ways this product launch could fail, and then describe what your product is. And that could allow it to start you with the buffet. And then you could also say, is there a black swan event that isn't in those 50 ways that could have catastrophic impact? And then you could guide it to something that you're looking at that is maybe rare, but impactful. So in paradoxical thinking, what you want to do is you want to look at the tensions that you're trying to balance and see how hard it will be for you to maintain that balance. So for instance, a great example, and feel free to type this into your favorite tool, you might want to describe how our product could be both profitable and charitable at the same time. Well, we know there's lots of companies that do this, so maybe there's no risk. But what is the underlying risk in this tension is how it's executed. How is the charity part a supplement to the profit? How does the profit not degrade the charity? And when you look at this tension, there are definitely different models that approach this. But what you want to know is what differentiates them and which is most prone to failure. What could cause this balance to fail? This is what really becomes important, because you could look at it by saying, well, maybe it's a buy one, give one, or maybe it's because I give a certain percentage of my revenue to a charity, or maybe my cause is in supporting how I manufacture the product. But all of these have different potential risks associated with balancing profit and social good. And so being specific about that tension that you recognize you're balancing is what's important to understand how you could fail. If you are not able to succeed profitably through a method of manufacturing that's sustainable and charitable, then maybe you need to look at another model for achieving that goal. When you want to do opposite thinking, try one of these types of questions and prompts. And this is something I would also encourage you to see, because what happens is, and by the way, I would also encourage you to do this in more than one tool, because what's fascinating is they don't all come up with the same list. The buffet actually gets bigger the more tools that you bring this problem to, because the way that they think about the problem, the way they're structured thinking, and those tools bias may lean towards something that isn't something the other model weights as heavily. So being able to see the landscape of solutions that are addressing this problem are really helpful when working with generative AI on contradictory thinking. So here's a great example where people are trying to make smart home management simple, but it's actually getting complex the more security that's overlaid on it. So what you really want to imagine is describe the ways a product for managing smart home could become more complex and vulnerable to hacking, which is the exact opposite of what you want to happen. And then if I build a product to make managing my smart home easier, based on the answer to that first question, what would I need to ensure the opposite doesn't happen? Right? Because if I'm thinking about all the ways a smart home management problem is complex and vulnerable, I'm working absolutely at odds with my goal, because my goal is to make smart home management easier. So thinking about what the opposite looks like means I have to address all the things that could create complexity and vulnerability in my solution for making it easier to manage. And that's a tension in my thinking, because when I think about easier to manage, what's likely to happen is I may make it more vulnerable to hacking. The simpler it is, the less authentication methods there are, the more integrations there are, the more vulnerable it may be. And so thinking about making it easy may be a customer lens on a problem that technically creates vulnerability that would make you less likely to succeed. So asking generative AI to ensure the opposite outcome from the one that you want will show you all of the things that could occur. You want to ask contrary questions. You want to explore the implications of the opposite. You want to understand how the opposite might actually be the right way to go. Why would the opposite be better than the approach that you're taking? Under what circumstances would the opposite solution be the right solution? So in exploring the opposite, the one that's more complex and vulnerable to hacking, you're going to understand the things that you have to do to make it simple, but yet secure. Right? And so those things really are not only the tensions of the paradox of simple and complex and vulnerable and secure, but they are actually the opposites of each thing. So by asking the question is, if I were to make the opposite product than I was making today, what would that involve? Now I understand all of the things I have to avoid. And then lastly, this inversion thinking example really is about that what might cause us to fail, what might cause the planes to crash. So in this scenario, this example is first describe how a mapping product designed to keep drivers safe actually makes driving more dangerous. Then tell me, if I built a mapping product designed to keep drivers safe, what should I do to ensure I don't actually make driving more dangerous? And what happens when you put this in is it looks at that problem from a user perspective, but also from a design perspective and from a build perspective. And you start to understand that your myopia around keeping drivers safe may actually cause you to ignore things that you would do that could be ancillary to that, but also could create less safe driving conditions. For example, you want to keep drivers safe and you send them lots of notifications, that could be highly distracting. Hey, this is up, this is up, this is up, constantly knowing there's something that you want to keep them safe, you may actually create a more hazardous driving condition. And so, again, putting these questions into AI allows you to keep the door open for possibilities you hadn't thought about. I'm not actually saying how many notifications are too many notifications before this product becomes unsafe. I may eventually get to say that, but right now I'm looking at all the ways I could actually make this product less safe than I intend. So the premeditation of evils is a powerful risk strategy when paired with generative AI, because it's not only a speed booster, generative AI is a cognitive partner. It can help us ask questions that might be challenging to our assumptions, but it can also be helpful because it's not tied to anyone in the room who's looking at the problem. It's not trying to make one person's case better than another. It's looking at the problem that you're trying to solve or the goal you're trying to achieve. And without regard to who's in favor or who's against that goal, it's helping you prepare for the things that might cause your goal to fail, you to fail at achieving your goal. That idea that this discussion partner has no attachment to anything except the outcome you're trying to get, and you're trying to get a successful outcome, it's just going to keep throwing these ideas at you without regard to which ones are most important. And it's really critical that you see this as a partnership, focusing on the things that matter the most. Are these ethical issues? Are these business issues? Are these employee issues? What are the issues that are going to be created if these edge cases occur? Or if I run into a challenge I didn't expect, where will I look for the risk that I created in my original plan to go fix it? And it's hard to do that after the fact. So doing it up front as a pre-mortem really allows you to ask the hard questions without conceding defeat. It allows you to strengthen your plan, to assure success by having contingency plans should any of the risk, challenges, problems, issues emerge that you've explored. I hope that this was really informative and opened your eyes to another way of imagining success. I think we've all been taught over the years that planning for failure is time consuming and not necessarily productive or constructive, but I'm here to tell you the exact opposite, and hoping from this discussion, you at least open the door to consider that possibility.